Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone, depending on where you are in the world at the moment. We've just started to see some people start to arrive now, so we'll give them a few moments to log on. If you, to make sure you can all hear me okay, can you put a note in the chat box just telling me where you are in the world at the moment? Hi, Gianluca. Hope you're well. Yeah, it's coming from sunny Rome. We've got people from Aberdeen, Dubai. Hi, Jacek. Duncan's in Dubai. Jacek's in Calgary. Ian, hi. So we've got Ottawa. So we are coming in from all continents. Hi, Ron in Houston. Okay, great. So, yeah, we'll just give it another minute or so, guys. There's still people coming through. So, for the people that are arriving, we seem to be from all continents, which is great. We've had a fantastic response to the webinar today. So thanks for everyone who's registered and attending. I'll just give them another minute or so. Through. Yeah, there's a few people I think having more sunshine, Laurel, than there is in Aberdeen here at the moment. It's still probably 2 or 3 degrees, and there's people commenting on how much warmer it is elsewhere.
Yeah, same here. We're warm, but cloudy and rainy, as it often is for you too. So it's like we're in the same place.
Yeah. I remember that. It's not too far apart, actually, New York and Aberdeen in terms of weather.
Yeah.
So I think you just get better summers. Okay, guys. I think we'll. Yeah, there's people coming through, and there's bound to be a few that come in late. So let's get started. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mark Ingram. I founded Real Talent Matters in 2017. We're an international search and recruitment firm, specializing in the energy markets. So we provide executive management, senior tier operational and engineering appointments. And over the last few months, we have been providing our clients with a lot of remote specialists who require help in this area, which has led me to first researching and finding experts on this subject, which led me to meeting today's guest, Laurel Farrer, who's kindly agreed to provide some thoughts on today's topic. My screen's just frozen, guys, so just bear with me. No, I've got you back again. So the today's technology. So yeah, delighted to have Laurel on today's call. I know she's been extremely busy the last few weeks, given her area of expertise. So I'm grateful she's taken the time out, especially early in the morning from just outside New York, Laurel. So welcome, delighted to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Looking forward to the talk and the presentation that you're going to go through. So just before we start, I'll give you a proper intro, Laurel, just in terms of just I know she probably won't go through this herself, so I'll do her the justice that I think she deserves. So Laurel is the founder of Distribute Consulting in the Remote Work Association. She, strengthens, leverages virtual workforces to solve corporate and social economic concerns. Yeah, I think you probably a global thought leader would be the correct word, Laurel, on the topic of remote work. So Laurel collaborates with world's leading businesses and governments to eliminate virtual work discrimination, prevent policy retraction, increase remote job accessibility, train distributed leaders, which, yeah, the whole topic that I'm sure we'll talk about more, and design economic initiatives. She also shares her experience, which I've read quite a few of your articles recently, Laurel, just prior to this. So she shares her experience as a Forbes contributor and a subject matter expert for business education curriculum and virtual software product advisor. And I'm sure I could make the list go on given the last few months, Laurel, but yeah, listen.
I'm just a remote work nerd. Let's just call it that.
Just to simplify it.
Yeah.
But hey, listen, no, I'm delighted you've taken the time out today. So I will hand the reins over to you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and thank you for that introduction. Yeah, I hold a lot of titles in this space, but I mean, I think it's important to recognize that 6 months ago, those were all very small titles. This was a very, very small conversation about remote work, and it was very heavy on the side of advocacy, really trying to convince companies to consider this as an option and look at the benefits, and please let's talk about this. And now here we are, that it's now a critical business skill that we all need to understand and that we all need to know more about. So yeah, I'm here today to speak more on the virtual organization side. So the organizational development and behavior side of fully distributed organizations, and what this means as a company and the changes that we need to make as an organization in order to make the change successful and sustainable. So that's my unique specialty. However, you know, it's a Wednesday, and we've all attended a lot of webinars probably on the topic of remote work, and so I am here, yes, to deliver some information that I think you should know, but even more so for all of you, let's take this as an opportunity to just have a great conversation about remote work. Like whatever questions you have about leadership or about you know, onboarding or culture development or real estate or whatever, like any lingering questions that you have, let's talk about it. Because yeah, that's just kind of the space that we're in right now as a group, and as we're in today. Like, it's hump day, and we've all been hearing a lot about remote work, but we all have like those lingering questions of like, I wonder. And this seems like a great opportunity. We've got a good sized group that we can have a great discussion. We can all have a voice at the table. So yeah, I'll go through my presentation fairly quickly, probably 20 to 30 minutes, and then let's just leave the rest of the time for Q&A so that you guys can ask anything. Let's just have this be more of a round table than a presentation. Along with that, please feel free to ask questions during the presentation as well. It's much more engaging and a lot less boring if you ask questions. So feel free to raise your hand and just say, hey, can you pause right there? Like, feel free to interrupt. I'm not offended. Mark's not offended. He's prepared for it as well. So just go ahead, pop something into chat and say, I have a question about that. And we can stop the presentation, we can discuss it, and then move on. Like, let's make this casual and fun. So as a reminder though, when I am in presentation mode, excuse me, in Zoom, I cannot see the chat box, and I can see a thumbnail of Mark, and that's all. So the way that you will raise your hand and signal to us that you have a question is just write in chat, and then Mark will facilitate the question to me. So yeah, so with that, everyone go ahead and type something in chat, doesn't matter what it is, and maybe type what you're hoping to get out of this webinar, just to get you in the habit of using that chat, because I don't want you to be afraid of it. I want you to make sure that you feel comfortable asking questions. And then while you do that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we'll move into the presentation. Like I said, we are talking about the virtual organization today. And so this is the very, very high level of organizational development and behavior specifically about remote work. So this is a topic that all businesses need to study and research and understand, but we've zoomed it in even further to specialize exclusively in remote work. And this comes from the fact that I, as an operations manager, have been converting companies from physical to virtual for 14 years. And there was a time about 5 years ago that I needed this information and this data for myself. I was looking for continuing education as an operations manager, saying, okay, I need organizational development resources. And they didn't exist. And I kept searching and searching and searching and thinking, well, they've got to be somewhere. Like, where is this? And they didn't exist. And so, as you know, as we do as consultants and very resourceful innovators, we continue to gather the research until we look down and realize that we have now created the resources that we were originally seeking. So happy to answer questions based on experience as well as based on the research that we've been collecting for the past 5 years. That is now suddenly very, very valuable. So as an introduction, Mark did a great job of introducing who I am, but to introduce my company and what we do, we are the world's largest consulting firm that specializes exclusively in remote work. I want to say that we're the only one. I think that we are, but that feels like a very bold statement. So I haven't found any other consulting firms that specialize exclusively in remote work. Let's say that, but I they've got to be out there somewhere, I would think. But we are the world's largest, I can confidently say. We do work with very reputable clients such as Zoom and Slack and Panasonic and Logitech to help them through a myriad of problems about remote work. Now, the first and the origin of our company is that we do specialize in change management, actually helping companies convert their operations from physical to virtual and build that virtual infrastructure that they need for communication, as well as continued productivity. However, we also supplement that change management, those change management services, with also infrastructure strategy. So this means that strategic programs and initiatives that are often hosted by nonprofit organizations or foundations or governments, both national and state governments, we help them through the process of using virtual jobs as a tool to solve a problem. So this can be solving a problem like diversity in a workforce, diversity in a regional economy. It can be economic development. It can be environmental sustainability. It can be any number of socioeconomic concerns. But we help them really strategize what those solutions could be and start from scratch. And then last but not least, we also do content and events. We are now in a market in which everybody needs to be a remote work expert. And unfortunately, it's tough to be a remote work expert if you don't have a lot of experience. So we are lending our experience to many of our clients to help them understand what remote work means as a market, as a new consumer profile, and help them access the credibility of our subject matter experts in order to sell their product better. So that's who we are. We are, and again, just easily summarized, we are all things remote work. Now, before I get into the content of the presentation, I'd like to share, just remind everybody, you may have heard this already, but I do think that it's critical to recap that the history of remote work is not new. I get a lot of questions from people that are asking if teleworking is trendy, and they're very concerned and skeptical, saying, wait, hang on, we're putting our international economy in the hands of a Silicon Valley trend. That's ridiculous. And so that's where I can very confidently put them at ease that this is not a trend at all. Remote work, and under the name of teleworking, telecommuting, has been happening for over a half of a century. So we do have plenty of learnings, plenty of best practices that have developed in that time. But the reason that it's seeming like a trend is that it's just much more accessible in the past decade due to the affordability mobility and accessibility of the technology that enables mobile work. So because we have the rise of the smartphone and public Wi-Fi connections, that is what is enabling more mobility in our workforces. So it is definitely hitting a tipping point. We knew that 2020 was going to be a big year for remote work. Obviously, we had no idea how big of a year it was going to be, but we did know that it was going to boom to a certain extent and hit a tipping point in 2020 just because of the history. So now it's exceeded our expectations, and so we're trying as hard as we can as thought leaders and as advocates to make sure that this boom is happening in a responsible, sustainable way. Speaking of the boom, the latest statistics that I get asked for probably on a daily basis or multiple times a day basis are these. What percentage of workers are we talking about? How big of a boom is this? Well, based on previous statistics, we have estimated that, and by we I mean the remote work industry has estimated that about 70% of the global workforce could work remotely at least 1 to 2 times a week. Now, this includes not only people working from a home office, but this also includes mobile workers. So delivery drivers and plumbers, or anybody that doesn't need to commute to a centralized location in order to perform the tasks of their job. So 70% is a massive number to wrap our head around. And we are seeing that come to fruition. It's estimated that the latest data, and this number is growing by the week. Just 3 weeks ago, this number was 20%. But as of right now, it's estimated that 30% of enterprise employees will never go back to the office or will have the permanent option to work from home at least part-time. 30%. So 1 in 3 people that you know in your office or in your network, 1 in 3 people will become a remote worker, at least part-time, from this point forward. That's a shocking number, and one that we, as advocates, never even dreamed of seeing in the next decade or two. So this is happening much faster and at a much higher scale than the world ever anticipated. Even in March, we never expected these numbers to be happening at this rate. So the critical takeaway for all of us to understand, oh, I'm sorry, I thought I had another slide in there, but the critical takeaway for us to understand from this is that even if we and our workplace does go back to the office, it is now critical that we all understand what remote work is and how to work in the dynamics of virtual teams. Because whether we are working with our clients or our vendors, our partners, or even our teammates, like I said, 1 in 3 of them are going to be virtual, and so we need to understand these dynamics, period. It is part of the new normal. So let's talk about that. As an organization, so like I said, feel free to ask any questions that you want about leadership or this collaboration or networking or whatever you want. But we will, for the purpose of the presentation, we will focus on the organization. What change do companies need to make to their infrastructure that will make or break their success? So the first thing to understand here is that what has happened already is not the true adoption of remote work. It has been a workplace change. So people have been working in the office, now they're working at home. And that's the only thing that changed. And there is a very big difference between just being at home during work hours and then working remotely as an organization that maintains or enhances business operations. Those are 2 completely different things. So what needs to happen now is you might be working remotely and your team might be working remotely, but you haven't optimized remote work as a business strategy. So that's the difference that we're talking about here, is not just changing your location, but changing the way that your business operates. So this is how we measure success here at Distribute Consulting. And this is the information that I was looking for 5 years ago that defines the difference between what has been happening in offices and what the business is that we're used to operating, and then what the difference is between that and what we need to do in order to optimize this as a business strategy. What is the difference between virtual operations and physical operations? And that boils down to these 6 pillars. There's workforce, workplace, infrastructure, culture, management, and compliance. And we'll zoom into each of these at a much deeper level, so that you can understand exactly what the differences are. It looks like somebody's raising their hand. Do we have a question, Mark?
Yeah, sure, Laurel. There's couple of questions come in. I think you're about to cover them anyway, which is why I didn't jump in. But Fraser's asking, in terms of remote management, what advice do you give for changing the mindset of personnel, specifically in regards to working from home? He's finding that the productivity of their personnel is not nearly as high as what it would normally be in a structured environment, such as the office. I think you're about to touch, or you'll probably touch on that anyway.
We will touch on that, but the short answer is that all of these, actually, not just management, but all of these need to be based on the jump between working in an in-person environment, which is very collaborative and very synchronous, and then moving to a mindset that is based on autonomy or self-management. So the more that the managers can be trained on how to empower workers to make decisions themselves and control their own workflows, and the more that the workers can be trained on how to self-manage, that's going to be the biggest jump and the biggest difference. But you're right, Mark, we'll dive deeper into that. Any other questions before we dive deep into these pillars?
Yeah. Tony's asking, he said he sat through a recent seminar on remote working, and a key point was the managers being properly trained to manage remotely.
Yeah, and that's a big difference. That's a big barrier to success for a lot of organizations, is that the employers are seeing this, number one, it's just a workplace change. And so they're saying, okay, well, workers, you're the one that changed location, so it's up to you. Like, you need to create your quiet environment. You need to structure your day. Like, all of these changes are up to you. But then the workers are feeling like they're floundering, like, whoa, this is so different. I don't have any support. I don't have access to any of my colleagues and resources that I had in the office. I need help, like the employer, how are you going to help me? So the employer's waiting for the worker to take responsibility. The worker's waiting for the employer to take responsibility. And in the meantime, everybody's stuck. So it really needs to be a very collective, comprehensive change management in which everybody's involved.
Yeah, agreed. Just one more quick one before you move on.
Yeah.
Well, Luca's asking, in particular, clients' acceptance of remote working. Where does the client fit within these pillars, which you're about to start on, I think.
Right. So I think it is important to understand that we are just operating as virtual teams, period. Like, whether somebody is 6 floors down or 6 continents away, we're still going to send them an email. So the relationship of how we collaborate as teams is absolutely needs to be the same. Like, we're still going to have all of these same dynamics in our relationships with our clients as we are in our teams. So yeah, these best practices, I'm going to be speaking in the language of our internal organizations, our internal staffs, but think of them in terms of, okay, well, I'm working with people in my company, but I'm also working with people like my clients or my vendors. So feel free to interpret them however you want. And then at the end of the presentation, we can jump back and circle back to this and say, all right, now let's think about this in terms of our clients or in terms of recruiting or in terms of whatever. Like, let's spin this off into other directions. This is just, the core of the knowledge.
Super.
Great.
Right. Great, Laurel. Thanks.
Yeah, well, feel free to keep interrupting me, everyone. These are really great questions, and I want to make sure that you're getting the information that you need and want, not just what I think you should hear. So let's jump in and start with the first pillar, which is workforce. Now, this is exactly like we talked about just a second ago, that we really need to be equipping our workforces to be as autonomous as possible. Now, in each of these slides, you're going to notice there's this gray sentence right here that says that it is in all caps. That is what we are looking for as consultants, as what is called the OKR, or the objective and key result of each of these pillars. So for the workforce pillar, what we want to see as an ideal, our objective for the workforce category, is that all of the support, recruiting, and training of your staff encourages autonomy. So that means we're going to update the talent acquisition funnel to be screening for skills that are very critical, uniquely critical to remote work. We're going to be updating the onboarding programs in order to support and train them in a very supportive way and introduce them to a virtual culture. We're going to be updating employee experience in all categories, making sure that offsite workers have the same employee experience as onsite workers, so there's not a discrimination between promotion rates or accessibility to resources or accessibility to information. There's also going to be different benefits and recognition that need to be added to the employee package and benefits package that uniquely support remote work. And then also that there are structures in place that really enable work-life balance, because this is a massive, massive problem for remote workers. And as many of you have already experienced in the past 4 months, this is not just a personal concern, but it's a professional concern as well. If you as an employer are worried that your employees aren't going to be working, and you're putting this unspoken or maybe spoken pressure on them to be performing, to maintain productivity in this new model, then they are actually going to be overperforming. They're to a dangerous degree. The average remote worker works 2 to 4 hours a day more than an in-office worker. And so that puts them at very high risk for burnout. And as we all know, that can not only cost us an employee, but that can also be a massive block in our production cycles as well as our productivity rates. So we want to take care of our workers and make sure that they are protected. With our workforce, we want to make sure that they are enabled to be autonomous, that they are equipped to be self-managers. Now, we'll talk about this in the work or in the management section, but there's a very big difference between autonomy and abandonment. So what we're not saying is just let go of your employees and let them do whatever they need to do. They still need to collaborate as a team. We still need to be working together. They still need to feel connected and recognized and heard, maybe more than ever, like we'll talk about in the culture section. So we're taking our hands off, but not walking away, if that makes sense. All right, so the next step is infrastructure. Work still needs a place, and so we still need an office, but it's not going to be a physical office. It's going to be a virtual office. So a virtual infrastructure, let me say it this way, a virtual office is constructed with software and processes. And so how we build this virtual office is we create a tool stack, we identify how to use that tool stack, and then we make sure that it is accessible regardless of location. This is what contributes to equal employee experience, is this virtual office space, because it means that you can access your work, you can fulfill your tasks and role with an internet connection. And you don't have to be in a certain location in order to access the information to do your job. So what we're saying here is that it is not necessarily, we're not going to be choosing a location for our staff and saying, okay, this is our in-office staff and this is our virtual staff. The goal there is is not that. The goal is location independence. We want location to be irrelevant to the work that needs to be done, so that people can choose based on their task, based on their role, based on the events of the day. They can say, oh, there's an important meeting, I'm going to go into the office so that we can all be in person together, or I'm going to be offsite, I'm going to be traveling on the day of that meeting, but I know that I can still access that meeting because of the tools and I won't miss a beat. So we want location to be irrelevant to the business continuity of your organization. So, like I said, how we construct that is with software and processes. We also are going to create a project management system in which you can assign tasks to your team members, and that's also how they report on productivity, so that you can track and supervise your employees without visual confirmation that they are working. And then we're also training and building information security. You would never ever build an office without a locked door, and the same thing is true for your virtual office. You need to keep your people safe, you need to keep your information safe, and that's with increased information security. And then all of this is corralled in a handbook. Handbooks are the Bibles of distributed teams. And so if you don't have a handbook, this is something that I highly recommend that you work with a consultant as quickly as possible to get one built. But this is how you manage all of the information. Essentially, this is giving somebody the tour of the office, is opening up the handbook and saying, this is how this company operates, because they won't have the opportunity to walk into the office and see it happening. So with a handbook is how you show that and track that. All right, next is workplace. Let me take a quick break from talking and ask Mark, do we have any other questions that I need to address before continuing to ramble?
Yeah, sure, Laurel. Mark's asking, what's your take on employer liability for things like workplace safety, ergonomics, health standards for remote-based workers?
Yeah, well, funny you should mention that, because that's exactly the slide that we're on. So let's talk about that, because it's a tricky conversation. I'm sorry, I'm going to grab some water. So what's tricky about this conversation is that all of those regulations are legally enforced. They're legal liabilities. However, in order for regulation to be legally enforced, there needs to be a law. And the governments have not caught up to the remote work revolution. So there are very, 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 very few laws about home office spaces. In fact, about 8 years ago, I think it was 8 years ago, both the UK and the United States, and I think it was Australia, all took a stab at this. And they said, oh, people seem to be working from home more. We're going to release some new laws and regulations about home office safety, and I mean, all of the things that we just talked about. And then within a year, they all retracted them. There was such a backlash from the employers that they said, no, this is irrelevant. This is not anything that this is just complicating things. And remote work will never amount to a thing. Let's just ignore it. So they retracted all of the regulations, figured that we'll just brush it under the rug, and here we are. So there's two sides to that question. What you need to do legally as an employer is very, very, very limited right now. However, what you should be doing ethically should be doing as an employer is focusing on these elements of the workplace. We are still physical human beings. We are still working in a workspace, and we still need protection, especially in those points that were mentioned in the comment about occupational safety and health regulations, such as ergonomics and workplace safety, tripping hazards, lighting. All of those came about 50 years ago for the protection of our workforces, because they were dealing with chiropractic problems and carpal tunnel syndrome and temporary blindness. Like, we put those regulations in place for very, very good reason. And so now what's happening is everybody has gone home and has is not thinking one lick about if they're sitting in an ergonomic chair or not. They are sitting on the couch and they're slumped on pillows and they're working from bed, and you know, nothing about their lighting and temperature and seating is in compliance with regulations. So as employers, you don't legally have to do anything. However, you should still be doing something, at least offering a stipend in which people can buy a new chair or raise their the level of their laptop screen or something like that, so that they are working in healthier conditions. Otherwise, you're going to be having a very high peak in insurance claims and workers' compensation claims here in I would say 9 to 12 months. So
Yeah.
be preventative, be proactive about how you're addressing that. But yeah, do think carefully about how the working conditions that your team is in. The laws don't exist yet, but they will very quickly. Right now, all of our governments are very, very focused on economic health and resiliency, as well they should be. So their headspace isn't here right now, but it will be very, very quickly. As soon as the larger fires are put out, they will start thinking very heavily about this new 30 to 50% of the workforce that is working in very illegal conditions.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. Dan's just mentioned, yeah, compensation for home office expenses, just as you were saying that. Fiona's asking, Laurel, what type of info do you put into the handbook you just referred to?
Yeah, so I've got some information that that I can send to you if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn. I can send you an old article that I wrote years ago about like the bullet point list. But generally, it is just think of an old handbook. You know, like we're seeing a big resurgence in trends of the 80s and 90s in business place practices, and the handbook is no exception. Like think of it as the Bible of your organization. Like anybody can open this and find an answer. Because that's exactly what it is it's asynchronous support and training for your workforce when you are not there to answer questions. So anything that you think should be accessible to anybody in your organization, pop it in the handbook. Like it's a digital copy, right? It's usually just a website. And so you can make a change very, very quickly and easily. It's not like an old handbook that you would have to reprint the entire thing and release new versions and send out new memos. It's nothing like that. It's very easy to make a change. So anything that you think should be in there, put in there. At a minimum, you're describing workflows, you're describing the history of the company, the culture of the company, your remote work policy should be outlined in there. Setting up your workspace in a healthy and ergonomic way should be in there. Requirements about retreats, how to expense reports, like all of that information should be in your handbook. This is the record of everything that happens in your company, so that if I'm a brand new hire, I can flip through the handbook, search for my answers, and I can say, oh, that's how that works here. That's the function that your handbook should serve.
Perfect, Laurel, that's great.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Just one more quick one, maybe relevant at this point as well. I'll just have one last one before letting you crack on again. Tony's got a comment saying, you know, interesting challenge he's found on having a mix of on-premise and remote access is the software licensing models and approach, particularly with Microsoft, where perhaps the organization's not geared up with a licensing model to work remotely.
Yeah, which is ironic because Microsoft is a hybrid team themselves. So they should understand this pain. We'll learn this. We all will learn this very quickly, that the software that we use, excuse me, the software that we use for remote work, ironically, most of the time is not developed by remote teams. So even the iconic brands like Zoom and Skype and Microsoft Teams, all of those are not remote. They were not remote friendly prior to this. That's exactly why they're our clients. So we are able to help them understand this new dynamic at a faster pace. However, it's going to take a lot of time for the software to catch up. This is, we have to remember that, excuse me, the percentages of remote workers in the world were less than 1% 4 months ago. This was not a big viable market that people were trying to go after. Even Skype, or not Skype, Slack just 6 months ago blatantly refused to enter the remote work market. So it's going to take time for all of the software to catch up, because this boom did happen so quickly and so unexpectedly. There was not the normal ramping up of software that would meet this level of demand. The remote work industry as a whole, fast forwarded, the estimate is 10 to 12 years in the span of 2 weeks. So all of that organic growth that we were expecting, that would say, you know, as the market is growing in demand, then the functionality of the software grows with it. All of that organic growth and development didn't have a chance to happen. And so there's going to be a lot of frustration with organizations for at least a few months saying, well, this should exist. Why doesn't it exist? And it's like, yeah, it should exist. And that was on our roadmap for 5 years from now. So we're going to have to be patient. There's a lot of innovation that's happening. There's a lot of investment that's happening. So it is going to come, and it's going to come quickly. But in terms of all of the functionality and resources and benefits existing right now that we want it to, like the laws and the software, we just got to be patient.
Yeah, agreed. Just maybe a one-word answer, Laurel. Who develops? Dan's asking, who develops the workbook? Is it corporate?
Yeah, so it would be corporate. In fact, in the organizational charts of distributed companies, the role of people operations that many of you have heard about is almost always a part of the executive team. People operations is kind of a trend and a nice to have in physical companies, but it is an absolutely have to have in distributed companies, because that is the flow of operations, right? There's not tracking results and tracking people. You track results through tracking people. So people operations is much more of a necessity and a trend in remote companies. There's also often a head of remote, which is one of the roles that we place at Distribute Consulting, is placing a full-time role or a part-time role of somebody in your organization that thinks about nothing else other than how remote work integrates into your operational model. So people operations, human resources, head of remote operations, those are typically who manages the handbook.
Super. That's brilliant,
Okay.
Laura. I'll let you get back to presentation. We'll fend any more questions later.
Good questions, though. These are great. Keep them coming. All right, so we talked about workplace, so now let's talk about culture. This is a big question for a lot of companies, right? Well, we can't have birthday parties in the break room anymore. Like, how are people going to know that we value them as an employee? Like, okay, so what we need to do then is we need to take a big step back and remember that the birthday parties in the break room, the cereal bars in the snack corner, the ping pong tables in the lobby, those are expressions of your culture, but they are not your culture itself. Your culture are things like your mission, your vision, and your values. And then how you express that is going to change. Obviously, you're not going to be expressing them in physical ways like with a ping pong table. You're going to be expressing them in virtual ways. So when you think of it in that simplified way, then it becomes much easier problem to tackle. It's also important to remember that what builds culture is people feeling unified, because they share the mission, vision, and values of your company. So when people feel connected to that culture, when you are describing what your culture is loud and proud, and they're feeling connected to that, then they will also feel connected to each other. So true culture is about people feeling heard and understood and valued and appreciated. That's what true culture comes from. And that has nothing to do with proximity. It is entirely possible and very common for somebody to be sitting in an office and feel lonely, misunderstood, and disconnected. And they're sitting a meter away from somebody else. So we need to remember that true connection is not based on proximity. It's about how are we communicating to people that they are a critical piece of the puzzle in our company. So that can be done just as well virtually as it can physically. So that's where we focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, creating equal voices for everybody in meetings and in projects. We're going to build a culture of trust so that people understand that we trust them to be doing their work even if we can't see them, so that they don't feel that pressure to overwork. And they feel that they can be their whole selves at work because they're at home and they need to be their whole selves in their safe place. They don't have that buffer zone between who they are at work and who they are at home anymore. So we need to make sure that we are truly valuing and accepting our workers for who they are as individuals, not just as who they are as professionals. All right, and then next is management. So this is what we were going to talk about, right? We're going to dive deeper into this topic of how in the world do I know if my workers are working if I can't see them? Now, how we do this in distributed companies is we focus more on results than we do on supervision. So a very oversimplified example of this is if I hire a company to wash my car, do I need to watch them wash my car in order to know that they did a good job washing my car? No, I'm going to open the door of my car at 5 o'clock when they told me to pick it up, and I'm going to look inside and say, yeah, you guys did a great job. And I'm going to give them my phone number but when I drop off my car to say, hey, if you guys have any questions, let me know. And they might say, hey, we noticed that there's this stain in the back. Would you like us to take care of it? And I say, yeah, absolutely. And then same thing at 5 o'clock. I look in my car, they got rid of the stain. I know that they did a good job. I know that they made a good use of their time and that they produced the work that I hired them to produce. And I don't need to know if that was done in the garage or in the parking lot. I don't need to know what kind of soap they used. That I am empowering them to do the job that they think is best because I hired them to be the best at their job. Now, that's obviously an oversimplified example, especially when we're talking about, high-level accounting and engineering. I understand that it's not always that simple, but sometimes it is. When we hire the right people and we hire them with the right skill set and we empower them to do the job that we hired them to do, they don't need to be supervised. They need to be accessible. We need to continually communicate with them. We need to continually support them, make sure that they are aligned with the rest of the team, the rest of the company. But we hired them to do a job. Let them do it. So in that realm, we focus more on results and we track productivity by tracking results. So we're checking in with people after assignments are complete to say, did you do it? Did you make a good use of your time? Were you productive throughout the day? We're communicating continually with them through project management software, through stand-up meetings to make sure that we stay accessible, but they also are trusted and empowered to do the job that we hired them to do. Now, I know that this is a really big topic for a lot of people, so I'm going to stop here. Excuse me, does anybody have any questions about management?
Yeah, there's one or two coming through, Laurel. So I hope I've got your name correct. So Gian Domenco, in virtual environment, how are we going to express and develop leadership skills? Especially how are we going to train the new leaders with virtual teams?
So remember that the biggest secret of remote work is that remote work is still just work. So however you would facilitate equal participation in a meeting in a conference room can and still should happen in a virtual environment. However you would design an onboarding program and what makes good onboarding and training in your company in a office space is still relevant in a virtual environment as well. So for example, how would you train new leaders on those leadership skills? well, you would probably provide a training course of some kind. You would involve some job shadowing where you would assign a mentor and they would shadow them and watch them and have one-on-one meetings about like be able to ask questions and debriefings after the meetings. Like all of those would be elements of a really strong training program. All of those can and still should happen in a virtual environment as well. So you can have virtual courses, then you can come together as a group and discuss them and dissect them. You can have facilitated workshops in a virtual environment. You can still job shadow and should absolutely still job shadow in a virtual environment. Are they going to go with them to the conference room and have a hallway meeting after? No, they're going to go to a Zoom meeting with them and have a meeting and be taking notes in a Google Doc and have a one-to-one Zoom meeting with them after. Like there's still plenty of ways that you can observe and shadow and learn and mentor in a virtual environment. They're just happening in different places. So what made good leadership and good business in the physical world is still applicable in the virtual world. We just need to think about where it's happening. Great question.
Yeah.
Any others?
Yeah, we'll do one more. So Arden's asking, will you talk about onboarding and traveling to get employees to the appropriate skill and knowledge sets?
Yeah, so so I mentioned onboarding a little bit, right? Like onboarding is a really great example of like how do we create that very dynamic experience and make sure that people have the opportunity to meet other people in the company. You just have to come into it with intention. You're not going to be bumping into each other in the hallways, and so you're going to be scheduling meetings. Hey, I think it's important for you to have a meeting with the CFO. Hey, I think it's important for you to have a meeting with all of your team members and with this department. Like you have to schedule it. So everything about converting to remote work is about intention. So that's that answers that question. However, it's also important to remember that remote work is it's not one size fits all. It's not like this black or white decision that you're in the office or you're remote and that's the end of the conversation. It's customizable and it should be customizable. So you shouldn't be looking at other companies and saying, okay, well, what are you doing? And we'll just copy you. You should be having this conversation within your company, facilitated by a consultant if that's if you feel like you need some support and guidance. But you should be having this conversation to say, what does remote work look like at our company? There are plenty of companies that still require on-site onboarding for 2 to 3 weeks, and then you are able to work remotely. There's others that facilitate it 100% virtually. There's people that have a hybrid. Like whatever you think is best for your company, for your industry, for your workflows, for your culture, make it fit that. Like it's a strategy to be leveraged by your company. And don't feel like your company has to fit the mold of remote work.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, Laurel. Dan's mentioned the importance of utilising a fully integrated system to enable employees to work in a common environment, you know, where current work can be done, can be observed and status confirmed, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll mention that later as a really critical next step, but streamlining your communication channels is essential. Like I said, work still needs a place, and you would never, ever send your employees to different offices all over the world to work on a project together. And so you should never send all of your employees to different softwares to work on a project together. They need to be in the same place at the same time. It's just going to be a digital place instead of a physical place. Great comments. Keep them coming. I love it. So for the sake of time, we are going to keep going, but don't let that deter any questions. If there are more, feel free to raise your hand. Compliance we conveniently already talked about, and so I'll be able to skim over this one, but this is really just talking about how do we stay compliant, especially during this very awkward period that is a transition period of we have laws that are developed for physical workplaces, yet we are now working as a virtual workforce. Where's the balance in between? So it is very important to stay up to date. Again, a consultant can help with this. But it's important to stay up to date with any regulations that relate to your company because they're all going to be changing to accommodate virtual workforces. So information security laws, employment laws, local employment laws, not just the local employment laws to your HQ, but also the local employment laws of each of your workers, because they can differ by city and by country. Making sure that you are compliant with tax laws and industry regulations or industry licensure, but then also remote work policies. This is the biggest mistake that every single company makes, is that they just, number one, they don't have a remote work policy, which makes the employment contract null and void, because the working conditions have changed and the performance expectations and engagement have changed. And so if you're not updating that, then you've got a massive problem. But then also they underutilize the opportunity to sign a policy. So typically a policy is something that's just like, yes, I agree to work off-site, sign here. And that is a missed opportunity. What a remote work policy should be is that supplement to the employment contract that says, these are all of the terms and expectations that I agree to make remote work in this company. What does the manager agree to do? What does the employee agree to do? What are performance expectations? When do I need to be online? Who's going to be paying for internet? All of those things need to be discussed and agreed to, especially before there are laws that mandate that it needs to be, you know, the employer's responsibility or the employee's responsibility. Right now, the most critical resource that we have is just talking about it as employer and worker, saying, how are we going to make this work together? All right, so the second section is about this change management process. As we are going through this change from just being allowed to work off-site and then truly optimizing remote work as a strategy for our companies, what does that process look like? And I'll go through this pretty quickly, but this is the tried and true method that I've used for the past 14 years and now use with all of our clients at Distribute Consulting. But we start with an analysis, then we move into resources, then training, then impact. So the analysis phase is where we evaluate what's going well and what's not going well. This is the equivalent of going to the doctor for a checkup. You think you feel fine, but are you really? We're going to be doing some deeper digging to identify if you truly are as healthy as you think you are, because most companies say, well, everybody's working from home, business is continuing, productivity is okay, I guess we did it. And it's like, well, did you though? Are you thinking about things like OSHA standards? Have you calculated your ROI on this? We're digging deeper. And so we're conducting a full, what we call a virtual health analysis on the 6 pillars that I've just walked you through, and really identifying, are we as healthy as we think we are? And identifying any risks or behaviors that you think are totally normal, but actually could be risks for sustainability. Then after that, we build that infrastructure. So that virtual office that we talked about, that's the second step of this change management process, is to create the tools, and then design the processes, and then create that resource, those policies and that handbook that tie everything together and teach you how to use all of these things. So that infrastructure is absolutely essential, and you have to have every piece of it in order for it to work. It can't just be everybody go home, take your laptop. You've got to still have that sense of place and structure in your company, and that comes from this building this infrastructure. Then after that is where we move into training. So that is where we're training both the manager and the worker on what is required in an autonomous environment. How do you supervise and empower employees to be autonomous? How do you let go of that control and that supervision? How do you structure your workday and set up your workspace? How does this all work? So it is, like I said, imperative that everybody is getting trained, the workers, the leaders, and very relevant roles like that head of remote, everybody's getting trained. And then next is to understand the why of your change, the motivation. How is this going to impact our company? How do we know if it's working? How do we know if it's worth keeping? How do we know if it is not working? Like, what does that all look like? And that is, that's the final step. Now, to zoom deeper into that, I know that that's kind of dangling a carrot. So to dive deeper into that, the last section here is to identify what are those metrics that indicate that you have successfully optimized remote work. What are the benefits that you should see if you're doing this in the right way? So the hint here is, if you are not seeing these numbers right now, if you are if any of these are declining or stagnant, then you may not have optimized this as much as you could have and should have. So the first is, like we talked about, productivity and output. If productivity is being maintained and output is being maintained, that's okay. Obviously, that's good. However, previous studies show, and these are studies from academic institutions as well as reputable consulting firms, so this is not internal or biased data, but remote workers should see an increased productivity of an average of 35 to 40%. So if you're not seeing that increase in productivity, there's something wrong. It's usually a disconnection in the reporting structure, but that needs to be reevaluated. The next is overhead costs. So overhead costs you should see a 21% higher profitability on average, or an average savings of 17,000 pounds, or about $20,000 per employee per year. These are massive, massive savings. And then next is engagement and retention. If your employees are feeling isolated and disconnected, something's wrong. That usually points back to the culture and to the management, but we need to dig deeper and identify that the isolation might be perceived as normal, but it is not, and it is very easily preventable. So make sure that you're seeing less absenteeism and less turnover rate from your employees. And then with all of that, it's also important to note that this has massive, massive benefits, not only for your company, but for your communities. Like I said, we can see incredible diversity, strengthening of diversity and environmental sustainability, economic recovery. All of these things can be strengthened when all of these businesses are embracing remote work collectively. And that's my personal mission in my career, is to help people understand that flexible work arrangements have the power to change the lives of people and of companies and of communities. So next steps, like I mentioned, next steps, number one, streamline those channels. Make sure that everybody is in the same place. Work still needs a place. So make sure that everybody's in the same place. Invest in some training, because the mindset of managers, especially mid-level management, is the number one barrier to successful adoption of remote work. So if you're not training your managers on how to let go of control, that's going to be the biggest sabotager of your success. And then finally, write that policy. Make sure that those expectations are clearly aligned, they're clearly recorded, and everybody has a chance to discuss them and agree to them. So if you have any questions, screenshot this. I'll also pop it into the chat. You're welcome to ask me any questions that we didn't have a chance to discuss today. I'm happy to continue the conversation, especially if you didn't feel comfortable asking a question in front of the group. But thank you, Mark, for the invitation to join you today and to have this conversation. It's been a great group, great questions.
Not at all, Laurel. Thank you for your time. It's been fantastic. We've got a couple of more questions. Maybe I can throw in now. Ellie is asking, I would say quite pertinent to previous conversations. Do you know if oil and gas super majors and majors are moving towards remote working by the end of 2020? I can
the
maybe
answer is
jump
yes.
in here as well.
Yeah, you know just as much as I do.
Or are more inclined to the old ways with face-to-face meetings, being in the office. He's saying, being on the service side of the business, they're adapting to ways of the clients, but at the same time trying to meet the preferences of our employees, which can be challenging.
Yeah, and it's important to note that every single industry, that's really what COVID did that was unexpected and unprecedented is we assumed that there would be a natural and organic growth and development of the adoption of remote work, which starts with certain sectors and certain industries that are more inclined to the adoption of remote work. However, because of the pandemic and the healthcare lockdowns, every single industry, every single size of company, everybody at the same time went remote. So now the playing field is leveled and every single industry is starting to adopt at scale.
Yeah, no, agreed. And it's fast moving as well. Tony's mentioned, I suppose, just part of what you've said there. A major challenge for organisations looking to move to remote working can be the property leases, they're signed up to. I think, I've had a lot of similar conversations, Tony, in terms of companies looking at that overheads at the moment, and what's possible going forward. As we probably agree, Laurel, companies will look to sort of downsize that office space and the overhead savings as we transition to more remote staff.
Yeah, yes and no. So there's a lot of people keep asking, like, is this the death of the office? No, it's not the death of the office, but it is the death of how we used the office previously. So how the office is being used and when and by who, that is going to change. However, there will still be centralized work. There will still be gathering opportunities and a necessity to gather in person. It's just going to be much more intentional about when and where and who that happens with.
Yeah, no, agreed.
Wonderful. Well, I need to jump to my next meeting, and I'm sure that a lot of our guests do as well. But thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. It was a great conversation.
Welcome. Thank you again, Laurel. And hope everyone enjoyed it. I'm sure they did. Got a lot out of it. So we'll speak soon.
Wonderful. Okay. Thanks so much, everyone. And
Take care.
my contact information is in the chat if you want to follow up. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Laurel. Cheers.